Welcome to Antimatter Garage. Now you may be a fan of the 1ZZ engine that came in the Corolla and the MR2 Spyder, or the 2ZZ engine that came in the Celica GTS and some other cars around the world. I, however, don't like either of them. The 1ZZ especially was the worst engine I've ever had. I've had 5 of them now because 3 of them broke, leaving me with the other 2 that I got rid of very quickly. So I replaced it with the 2ZZ, hoping for something better. Unfortunately, I've had nearly as many problems with the 2ZZ, so I'm really not a fan of these engines. So I'm going to show you what the problem is this time, and feel free to make comments. Can you hear that? That valve train noise? I will... So the engine's been making that noise pretty much since I bought it, and what I noticed was that it would do that when it was cold, and then after I drove it for a little while, really only maybe a minute or 2, it would smooth out and go away. So I just kind of thought maybe it was a valve clearance issue, and I probably needed to do some shimming or something, and that it wasn't that big of a deal. However, when I got done leaving it on the lift for 30 days, I don't know why that would affect anything, but it wouldn't go away. It didn't do its normal thing. So in addition, I was getting some pops from the exhaust. I'm not a huge fan of the poppy exhaust that seems to be really popular these days, mostly because I know that theoretically that's a bad thing. And in my case, since it's not on purpose, it's a bad thing. I went on the internet and looked around, and it seems to me as though it could be a very worn out intake camshaft. Again, a problem I've never had on any other car. So anyway, I'm gonna open the valve cover and take a look at the camshaft, and I'm really afraid of what I'm gonna find, because they were saying if you're hearing exhaust pops, that usually means that it's pretty well worn. And I went on the internet and saw that a guy had this problem, and apparently it can be a problem with some 2ZZ engines. And given the other issues that I'm having, it's kind of a perfect fit for my problem. So I'm going to pull the valve cover off, and we'll take a look. Now, 3 things bother me about doing this. The first is that car is leak-free, and it's the only time I've had a leak-free car for this long, and I'm really happy that it's leak-free. And I'm afraid if I pull the valve cover off, then put it back on, that it might develop a leak there. 2, I am concerned about the torque spec on those bolts. They're very small. It's a very small number, at least on my wife's car it is. And I found it very easy to break them. And fortunately, though, I don't think they go into the head. I think there's like a little lip that sticks out, and I'll take a look and I'll show you if that's the case. And the third thing is I'm afraid of what I'm going to find, so let's see. Well, okay. Here's a great big old giant surprise for me. There is nothing wrong with this cam. You can see a little bit of wear here, but I can't catch my fingernail on any of this. That spot right there, it looks like it might be worn. Nope. A little bit of wear on this one too, down there. This one especially looks... Oh yeah, I can feel a little bit of a... It's not flat. Right there. Maybe that's not good. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely feel some warpage on there. It's not flat. whereas this one right here, it's super smooth. That's the only one right there, which is interesting because I noticed the most noise coming from right around here. So now, there is actually some wear there though. So this is the underside of the valve cover for the 2ZZ engine, and you can see up here in the corner, oil comes in here and goes to this little oil squirting gallery thing. You can even see the holes where the oil comes out and drips on the camshafts. So what I did was I put a little bit of compressed air in here. You don't need much at all, just a little bit. Otherwise, yeah, you don't want a lot. So just like 5 psi or so will do. And in this case down here, I actually saw some oil come out, so I knew it was squirting. But you can actually put your hand sort of over it and feel each hole that air is coming out. So I made sure that those were all, you know, clear and would be doing their jobs. There's also an O-ring right here, and I will do my best to replace that if I can because it feels, yeah, it's. I don't think that O-ring's any good anymore. I have a whole bunch of O-rings. Hopefully one of them will fit. So another thing then is I'll show you where the oil goes. Alright, so here's where that hole is, where the oil comes up, and the ring kind of comes around like this and goes back again, and so the oil comes out and is supposed to oil, you know, bathe these camshafts in oil. Now there's some dispute as to whether or not it does a good job of that. If it did, I shouldn't be seeing wear, but the truth is, that may be normal. I really don't know how many miles this engine has. I got it from, you know, online, Monkey Wrench Racing, I think. And so, you know, they say, oh, it's low mileage because it came from Japan, but they don't know. There's no counter on the engine, right? That's on the odometer. So I can tell you though that it's believable to me that those squirters don't do that great of a job, because the wear that I do see, like this is just a visible mark, but I can't feel anything at all, and that's fine. And if it had well over 100,000 miles, that would probably be, you know, normal. But I've seen some engines in my time where you really can't tell that the engine was running, that there are no marks on it at all. They're like just beautiful. So I kind of think if they had sufficient oil, they should look a little bit better than this. But yeah, I don't know. We can argue about that forever. So I'm not really sure. But if there is, if there's a problem, you know, here it could also be that, you know, the timing chain isn't tensioned properly. You know, the guide's down the bottom and the tensioner could be bad. There could be other reasons for that, right? So I don't know. What I know is mine looks okay. This is the only lobe that concerns me. It's only on the high lift. So theoretically, it should only give me a problem when I go into lift, which is every time I apply the throttle, more or less. So it should be concerning. But I don't have time to like swap out cams and do things like that. I need this car running, so I'm just gonna live with that for a little bit longer. But I'm happy to see that there's no real major, you know, damage or issue there. But I think there's too much valve noise, so I'm thinking it's got to be something, and I'm thinking it must be the valve clearances. So I'm gonna measure those now and hope that I'm wrong, and maybe it's just normal noise. But I'll show you how I do that. So what you need to do is get yourself a set of feeler gauges. These, I don't think they're too expensive because I've owned these since I was very young, and I didn't have a lot of money when I was very young, so I'm guessing 30 bucks or something. Anyway, you can see they're precision instruments, and they come with it's very specific thickness, which is etched onto them. Like this is 12 thousandths of an inch, or 0.305 millimeters, which is nice. They're marked both ways. And what you do is you stick it under all of the small lobes, this, and this. Also on the exhaust side. And you do it when the lobe is not touching. So for instance, on this cylinder, this is cylinder number 4, one is at the front of the engine being front if it were mounted longitudinally instead of transversely like it is here. But I can actually feel that there's the lobe. It's right there. So that means that right now this rocker is not touching this lobe by a certain amount. So you want to measure, so in other words, the lobe of the camshaft is round for a while and then it has the bump, right? So you want to measure where the round part is, and that should be consistent anywhere along that round part. So as long as the lobe's not touching in any way the rocker, you're good to measure. And you just stick your feeler gauge in between there, like that. And you go until you just barely feel any resistance. If you can't get it in, then your feeler gauge is too thick. If it slides in super easy and you can't feel any touching at all, then obviously it's too thin. So you want to get it so where you can just sort of barely slide it in between the two with just a tiny little bit of resistance. Then in my case, what I'll do is I'll crank the engine, and I'm talking like just a bump, just a quick trim like that, because I'm just trying to get this to turn so that the lobes will move. So you can measure, so right now I can measure this one, but this one I can tell the lobe's pretty close. I wouldn't want to measure that. Over here the lobe is actually on it, so I definitely can't measure that one. This one I probably could, but only from the back side, and I don't know that I'll be able to access that. So I may want to bump it, but you could do the exhaust side. So this one, for instance, is measurable. This one is measurable from that angle, assuming I can get in there. So you just go on those. You don't measure the high lift ones, these larger ones. You don't measure on those. You just measure on the others. And here is the spec. I will get close and hopefully you can pause the video and see. These are the numbers you're supposed to get. If you don't get in that range, 0.1 for instance to 0.16 millimeters on the intake, then it's out of spec. If it's too high or too low, then you need to buy a new bucket or a shim or whatever you want to call it. It goes between the valve and the rocker, and that will adjust it. And so what you do is you find out the values you need, and then you go, I guess, to Toyota, and you buy those, you wait for them to come in, and then you have to remove your camshafts. So I don't really want to do this, but that's what it takes, because you got to access that bucket. It's on the top of the valve. So if you look down in there, let me see if I can get a light on that. Okay, yeah, you can see where I'm down here where my finger is. I'll put light on it now. You can see down there, that's where the springs are. If I come over here, you can actually kind of see a little bit of the spring there, right? And then, again, I can't hold the light and point at the same time, so I'll point and then put the light back on. But right there is, the top of the valve. That's what holds the spring, keeps the spring from popping out, right? It's what attaches it to the valve. And the valve you can't see because it's hidden by all this stuff, because obviously the rocker pushes down on the end of the valve. So, but right in between there, I'll put an arrow on the video. In between there, wherever this arrow is where there's a little shim. So I also have this set of feeler gauges, which are nice because they got that bend on it, and that allows for better access in there. So if you can, I highly recommend these. It's good having both because sometimes the angle's bad, but in this case I think it might work out for me. So I bought this big kit a long time ago with a bunch of O-rings in it. I just thought, God, it'd be so nice to have all of these different sizes, and then I'd have what I need and not have to worry about getting one. I don't recommend this because I bought one for metric and one for standard, and I have never successfully used one. I just compared the closest size, this one, to what was on there, and it looked to me that the O-ring diameter of the rubber was wrong. I think the diameter of the loop was correct, but the rubber itself wasn't thick enough. I don't think it was going to hold, so I didn't want to make a situation worse. I do believe that O-ring is messed up. You can tell because the O-ring should be round, and when it sits in there long enough and it gets old, it'll develop like a flat spot on it, and it won't be pliable enough to come back into its round shape. That means it needs to be replaced. That's what's going on here. But I don't believe that any of these are going to work any better. So once again, going to put away this lovely kit that I've never successfully used and order that from Toyota to make sure I get the right one. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back in, and important to note when you do, there's a spot right here and on the other side, so I need to take that off. I will show you, you need to apply a material there, and I'll show you why. So that is the location between this front cover here and the rest of the engine block. There's a line, and to keep oil from leaking right at that crack, you have to put a little bit of material in there. You can actually see there's some there, and some on the other side as well. I can't remember if I mentioned or not, but I wrote down the results of my valve clearance, and honestly, you know, the measurements, and honestly, they're either in spec or just like the teeniest, tiniest bit. Like the spec here is 0.30, and it's 0.305 is what I believe I've got. And it's so close, I just don't, I mean, what would I order? It's not even 5, it's 0.005 millimeters out. I'm not even sure that value exists. What I can tell you is that it can be difficult to measure these. I'm going to show you here when you put it in. Let me see, what is that? 102. That might, let's see if it fits. Yeah, it does. Okay, so if you look carefully, I am in there, and it feels like it's right at 102. The way it doesn't slide freely, but it does slide in easily enough. I didn't jam it in there. But when I pull it out, if I went in at this angle, well, naturally it goes in, but if you hit at the wrong angle, a lot of times it won't go in, even though it could. So what I recommend, what I got were all these different results that I wrote down over here, because I measured them several times, and every time, each one of these, so there's 3 measurements here, that's how it goes. So this is the intake, and this is the exhaust. And every time I measured it, I cranked the engine a little bit to put the lobes in a different position. So I think it's best to measure it when the lobe is almost exactly 180 out from where you're measuring down in here. I think I found the most accurate result there, but you kind of get a feel for it. If you start putting it in sort of at this angle and it isn't working, and you have to kind of angle it that way more to get it to go in, then you start sort of doing that on each of them. But I do recommend playing with it a lot, because my first measurement here, for instance, was wildly off. And I'm pretty sure by these measurements that one was just incorrect. I think it was just going at the wrong angle, and it was jamming and it wouldn't go. And had I tilted it a little bit, it would have slid in between okay. So it's difficult to develop a lot of confidence this way. And that's why I did so many. But when I look at them, they're virtually all in spec. There are just a couple that are, like I said, a tiny bit out. Not enough, I think, really to have any major effect. So that's really good. But it's also really bad, because I don't know why they're clacking so much. It's possible the rocker arms are worn, but I don't know how you would do that other than this test. I mean, if they're worn in that area, then I should have measured a bigger value, right? So I've definitely have some wear on the high lift portion here on 3 and 4 on the intake. That's the only wear I saw on here that's significant in any way, and you can kind of feel it. Barely has a little bit of a bumpy feel to it here and on the other one. All the rest of them, where you see anything worn like that, it still feels super smooth, and I just think it's a minimal wearage. It's not really significant in any way. So I don't know what's wrong with this engine, but I personally don't see it here. I wanted to mention one more thing. I didn't really understand why there was even an O-ring there to begin with, so I took a look, because I thought, well, will it cause it to leak outside? And it won't. It's all internal here. So what it does is it keeps the oil pressure that's coming up from here from going out into here instead of up through the squirters. So if that O-ring is bad, that could be one of the reasons why the squirters aren't putting enough oil onto the intake valves. So yeah, just wanted to let you know that's something you might want to look at. So that O-ring is pretty important, actually. Kind of wish there were 2 on there. I always like to show the page in case anybody needs it. You can read all this if you just pause the video, hopefully. Putting on the crossbar, it's the last thing I have to do, and it looks like the nuts get torqued to 59 foot-pounds, and the bolts get torqued to 55 foot-pounds. So given all that information, I'd appreciate it if you could listen to this, and if you have an answer, put it in the comments, or you can email me at antimattergarage@gmail.com. Thanks. Oh yeah, two more things that concern me. One I think is related, one I don't think is related. The one I think is related is that I was getting popping from the exhaust when I let off the accelerator. So I previously had a rich running condition, and that's why I did the exhaust work, because I thought I had an exhaust, because I knew I had an exhaust leak in front of the O2 sensor. So now that that's fixed, I don't know why I'd still be running that rich. I did disconnect the battery to wipe the memory for codes and things clear, and I'm pretty sure that resets the short-term fuel trim. I don't know if it resets the long-term fuel trim. I'd have to look it up. So that may have something to do with it. I did a much longer test drive, and the popping went away. So I'll drive the car again like tomorrow when it's cold and see if the popping is there again or if it's gone forever. I don't know. The other thing that concerns me a little bit is that the oil dipstick keeps popping out. I did check for when I was checking for leaks. I put fogger on there, and some smoke came out with the PCV valve not in place. The PCV valve is new, and I could blow through it. So I don't know why this would happen unless I had a lot of excessive blow-by. But excessive blow-by, I think, should show up in smoke out the back of the car, and I'm not seeing any of that either. I don't believe I have high oil consumption, but I haven't driven it. I haven't really monitored that, so I don't know. So anyway, those might be important pieces of information as well. Thanks.